Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Data with Duke, the podcast where we interrogate data until it admits what it really knows and occasionally remind ourselves that the human brain is a deeply unreliable narrator. So today's episode is about a feeling I suspect that many of us have had recently, possibly this morning, possibly 5 minutes ago when doom scrolling, maybe over the last couple of weeks where we're looking at all of the stuff in the news. And the thing is that I'm not going to address anything sort of like specific that's going on like right now, but I think it's important to sort of like highlight that there's a lot of people are repeating a particular I don't know what's the opposite of a affirmation. I don't know, some sort of dystopian mantra, and that is this: that everything is getting worse. And if you go and speak to people, you'll hear that crime is up, that the economy's broken, that people are just generally angrier, that work is harder, that the world is on fire, and, sometimes literally. And of course, the people in charge don't have a clue of what they're doing. Now, listen, lots of people feel this way. And lots of people feel this way across all different ages, across all different professions, and actually all different political views. But this is the weird thing, and what we're going to dig deeper into today is that when you actually look at the long-term data, not the vibes, not the headlines, and certainly not X, something interesting happens. The story becomes complicated. So today, we're asking, is everything really getting worse? And if it's not, why does it feel like it is? And what does the data actually say about how perception and maybe media or measurement quietly mess with our little grey matter brains? So, let's dig in. Let's start with the feeling itself, okay? So, survey data across multiple countries, not just the UK, but like all over the world really, multiple countries show that people will consistently believe today that crime is rising, the trust in the government is collapsing, younger generations are worse off, and that overall society is in decline. Now, let me just say those points again while you all sagely nod along. Crime is rising, trust in the government is collapsing, younger generations are worse off, society is in decline. Just ask yourself this question: are those things true of today? And most of you will sit there and say, well, yes, of course. And I'm sure you'll wax lyrical about exactly why these things are happening. This isn't new, though. And if you actually go back decades, even centuries, you will find exactly the same complaints. Let me just repeat that. When you can actually go back centuries. Do you know what? You can actually go back millennia and still find people making exact same complaints. Crime has gone out of control. Nobody trusts the people in charge. Younger generations are really struggling, and society is in decline as a result. Plato, as in, I can't even remember what century, 3rd century, complained that young people were lazy in their works. We can still have print of Victorian newspapers that warned of moral collapse because society was in decline. Every generation since the dawn of time has believed it is living through the worst possible version of history. But feelings don't make something true. So, where do we go? Let's talk data. So, let's talk about crime first of all, because crime is one of the really strongest sort of really strongest examples, I should say, of taking perception, what we believe, and reality, what is actually going on. And the thing is that the beauty of it that we'll get onto a little bit later is that I'm gonna reel off a couple of facts, actual facts, verifiable facts. You can go and look them up if you really wanted to, but I can almost guarantee that many people, if you sitting there listening and saying, no, Duke, you're talking rubbish, I know that this is not true. And I'm just like, this is the point that I am making. No, you do not know this is not true. You believe it not to be true. So just open your mind just for a little second and just listen to these facts. And I'll put some links in the show notes. Go and find them on the website. You know where I am, datawithduke.com. And you'll see the links there. Just go and read about it if you don't believe me. But this is me. This is Duke. I have not done you wrong so far. This is all verifiable facts. So, according to the Office for National Statistics in the UK, violent crime peaked in about the mid-1990s. And then after that point, overall crime has declined for around about 2 decades. And over the last couple of years, there have been some increases in types of crimes, but actually nowhere near to where the historic highs of the 90s were. And yet, surveys also show that most people believe crime is rising sharply, even during periods where it was actually evidentially and demonstrably falling. So why do we believe this? Why do people genuinely believe, even though the evidence says the contrary, that crime is improving? Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. A couple of reasons that I believe for this. So this is opinion piece now rather than fact as before. So I think a big part of it is actually the way that the media works nowadays, because we're not just talking about media in a traditional way where we just turn on the television and we watch the 6 o'clock news, and then if you really want the deep nitty gritty, you go and watch the Trevor McDonald at 10 o'clock. No. Today, media is very, very different. So back when I was a kid, back in the 80s and 90s, crime reporting was basically crime happened. But now it's crime happened, here's the CCTV footage, here's a thread of people talking about it on social media, here's a reaction video on social media, here are 3 other angles of people who recorded it on their phones and posted to social media, here is also a podcast where an ex-MMA fighter is explaining their opinion about it, and here is a think piece from an expert with some academic qualifications that we believe might have a valid opinion. Media used to be that when a crime happened, we would experience it once. Unless you were actually physically there, you'd experience it when you heard about it. But nowadays, one incident, one crime incident can be experienced hundreds, thousands, millions of times. And our brains don't really count incidents. We count exposure, and exposure to certain crimes have exploded. So it's not that crimes are actually more prevalent or they're not more frequent. They're just more in our face, and that's why we believe that they are believe that crime is rising, whereas actually again it's not. So another element of it, let's talk about the economy, because everybody believes throughout history that we're all worse off now than what we were 5, 10, 15 years ago, or quite commonly, we were all worse off now than what we were in the previous government or whatever it is. So the problem is that with all of these armchair economists that actually come out again all over the media and social media and down the pub and whatever, is that the reality is, and take it from me because I've studied a little bit of this, and I mean a little bit of this, economic data is quite complex, and it's also very mixed. When you actually look at the general sort of viewpoint from expert economists, people who actually spend their entire lives dedicated towards this topic, they generally say that long-term global poverty has actually declined dramatically, that people who are the poorest in society all over the world, there's actually fewer people of those right now. The other thing to consider as well, which is directly linked to how strong an economy is that life expectancy has actually risen dramatically over the last century. And it was only just over 100 years ago that the life expectancy of a male was in the 50s, approaching 60s, and now it's approaching 80s. And the other thing to consider as well is that access to education has improved worldwide, because with education, or with effective education, I should be very specific, comes with the understanding of how nutrition works, about the importance of exercise, about understanding how mental health can be sort of dealt with. That all comes with education. So with an improvement of education, people's health generally does tend to get better, improve. But another stat for you, another physical fact for you, is that according to World Bank, extreme global poverty has fallen sharply since 1990, and that billions of people today live far better quality lives than their grandparents. Those are the statistics, those are the facts. That is the data. So why does it feel worse? And I think it's important to highlight, and again, this is something that has been there over centuries, is that economic well-being is relative and not absolute. Now, just a bit of a segue into the other videos, the other content that I've been putting together about some how to use spreadsheets. Well, I'm actually almost finished on recording. They're going to be uploaded shortly. I'm finished recording the beginner sort of phase. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking about within one of the beginner videos is the difference between being relative and absolute. So if these terms are a little bit, if you want a little bit, a little digger, what am I talking about? A deeper dive into what I mean by relative and absolute. I'll talk about it a little bit more there. But let's just give me a bit of a summary at the moment, is that when we talk about economic well-being being relative rather than absolute, what I mean is that you don't compare yourself to what you would have been like in 1950. What you actually compare yourself to is how your peers are doing, or how your parents were doing at your age, or how the influencers on TikTok with their suspiciously clean kitchens are doing. Add to that things that you hear in the media like wage stagnation or the housing affordability crisis and cost of living pressures that we've seen over the last few years. The trend itself might actually be quite positive, but the experience is still painful. And this is the important thing, and this is where nuance usually dies, is because both trend and experience can be true at the same time. We are actually better off, but we can also still feel that we are not better off. We can also still be struggling. So, that's a bit of data, something for you to think about. I hope I haven't blown your brains already. And actually, let's talk about the brain, because the brain is actually part of the problem. Respectfully, of course. Please let me just... excuse me while I muted, while I coughed. One of the reasons, by the way, for the slight delay on this week's or last week's podcast is because I picked up another cold yet again. If only Google flu trends was a thing, huh? Anyway. So, your brain is the problem. That's what I'm saying. Please understand, I do mean this quite respectfully, but here is a bit that's actually quite uncomfortable. Because much of the everything is worse feeling doesn't come from the data itself, but more to do with how you and your brains, all of us, how humans, process information. So, there is a thing that you might have heard people talk about online called negativity bias. And it's a real thing. It's a genuine evolutionary thing, because humans have evolved to prioritize threats. Threats to our physical self, threats to our mental health, threats to our well-being. So bad news often sticks in our mind. Things that are bad going on in the world, people are always talking about them because everybody remembers them. Whereas the good news that's going on in the world tends to evaporate off into the ether. We forget about it unless somebody happens to remind us. This is effectively what negativity bias is, and it means that losses often feel worse than the gains feel good, if that sort of makes sense. So something that impacts you negatively, but only slightly negatively, would actually feel a lot worse to you and your well-being than a really great thing that you've experienced that actually has a genuinely upwardly impact on your life. And another thing is that risks that come up actually feel larger than the probability sort of suggest. I remember having a conversation with my eldest son many, many years ago, who stayed up all night crying. Well, not all night. He was awake for a while, and I had to spend a fair amount of time with him, calming him down and realizing, because we had had a conversation about how the sun is going to explode in billions and billions of years' time or whatever. And his little, still developing brain just couldn't conceive of the idea of this being billions and billions of years away, that this thing was not actually a risk for him. And he was just waiting for it. He was lying in bed waiting for it to happen. And that's an example for a small brain that continues working on as going on as we grow a little bit older, and a risk that is a genuine risk, but our brain sort of focuses on it and says, "Oh my God, that risk is huge," whereas actually it's probably not. Your brain is not designed, in other words, to appreciate incremental improvement. It's actually designed to keep you alive on the savannah when there are animals chasing you. So unfortunately, even though we live in a modern world where there are no animals chasing after you trying to eat you, it's our brains are still running that software. So it's something that we also I think it's kind of worth considering if you start feeling a little bit anxious or nervous about something. Just to stop and ask yourself, well, why? What is the actual evidence? What do I see in front of me right now that I need to be feeling anxious about? And more often than not, it's very little. It's something that you can deal with quite easily, or something that actually you don't need to deal with, or certainly don't need to deal with just yet. Anyway, that's a little bit of CBT I picked up on in my past. So let's talk about memory then. So let's talk about why we actually see things negatively more often than not. So this is something called the availability heuristic. So if you can easily recall something, if a memory of something just comes to you really, really quickly, your brain assumes that it's like common, that it's something that just happens all the time. So let me think of an example is that, if you saw two cats today as you were walking to the shop, you could assume that everybody owns a cat. I've seen two cats in that small little journey to the shop, therefore there must be a million cats in my neighborhood. Flip that around, if you saw 3 crime stories on the news today or on social media today, or if you saw 2 economic doom headlines or one really angry viral video about whatever's going on in the world today, your brain just concludes, oh my god, everything is terrible. The reality is that you've only actually seen a very small number of things. The incidence number is actually quite low. So the data itself, though, doesn't feel real. It doesn't matter if you've only seen 5 things out of the hundreds of thousands of things that you've seen of that day, because the brain takes in at least 10 to 50,000 messages every single day, sometimes more than that in a fast-paced world. But if only 5 of those were actually bad news stories, your brain just forgets that. Your brain remembers the stories. It remembers the bad stuff. Your brain doesn't realize instantly that's actually only 5 things out of all of the things that I've seen today. So, another critical point, I suppose, to think about is that metrics themselves have not necessarily gotten worse, but they have gotten louder. So we're actually measuring that, and this is almost like me putting a little spanner in my own little works here, because my whole shtick, the whole reason that I'm doing this is because I believe that the world would be so much better if people spent a little bit more time looking at the data rather than how they were feeling about what's going on. And that's really what the summary of today's show is, but that's what my whole channel is about. Learn how to use the data. That's what I believe. I genuinely believe the world would be better if people did that. So here's me actually saying that part of the problem why things feel so bad right now is because we measure things more than ever before. The data is being collected by so many people in so many different ways. It's being cleaned and transformed and altered and enriched and enhanced in so many different ways. And it's being communicated to us in a myriad of different ways compared to what we used to get it just over a few years ago. That does not mean that things are getting worse. It just means we're seeing more of it. Or what we are seeing of it is just more in our face. So you could think about it this way, if you look at it sort of like a critical thought, that we can almost call it like measurement inflation. So in the past, things like there were lots of crimes that actually just weren't reported. They weren't written down or logged anywhere. So harms to people or to businesses or to buildings, they weren't tracked. And there were also a lot of social problems that were just simply invisible because nobody saw them. But today, on the other hand, everything is logged, everything is timestamped, everything is visualized. So this creates the illusion of deterioration when actually it's visibility that's increasing to it rather than the actual frequency itself. It's almost things like, have you seen that little engine light? Have you ever seen a little engine light appear on your car? Have you ever noticed that before? It's terrifying, it's dreadful, it's awful. Can you imagine, though, long before that little light existed, those problems with engines would still happen. So the dashboard lights, if they existed, would always be blinking. They just didn't have the dashboard to actually tell it. Those crimes were still happening, but we didn't have the metrics or the reports to tell us that they were happening. So, next part is about the media. I'm going to talk about the media a little bit before I get on to social media, and then I'm going to try and bring it down to a little bit of conclusion. So let's talk about the media. Let's talk about newspapers, tabloids, news channels, TV channels. Ones that have been designed for, I don't know, political gain. Some that have been designed for just informatics. Some have been designed for academics. Okay, these are all sort of traditional media. Let's be very, very blunt here. Is that media does not optimize itself for accuracy. It optimizes for attention. Let me just be very, very clear that a TV channel gains its money by people watching. And the longer people watch a TV channel, the more money that they get. So when they are putting together their stories, they are trying to grab your attention. They know, these media channels know, based on everything that I've already spoken about previously today, is that our attention responds to outrage, fear, moral conflict, uncertainty. Nuance does terribly for attention. So somebody says, some indicators are improving and others are worsening, but we need to consider the context. Nobody cares. It's not clickable. But a headline that says everything is broken in big capital letters is 100% attention grabbing. This is not a conspiracy, I should point out. This is just incentive structure, and data suffers really, really badly under it. Because people forget that the actual data that hides behind it is what's important. They just consider about the amount of attention that they're giving it because the brain says, oh, wait a minute, we know about these stories. We know it's bad and therefore everything is broken. So that's the media. Those are TV channels, those are newspapers, those are tabloids and things like that. The problem is we now, of course, have social media, and social media is everywhere in lots of different methods. You have your text-based, your short-form video-based. You've got images that are being shared left, right, and center, and videos that are being shared just far more easily today than they were before. We're in a similar situation with social media sharing, is that there are pages on social media that get paid because of the amount of people that click onto them and look at them. Social media doesn't just report reality, it amplifies emotional extremes. So what spreads best according to these social media algorithms are things like anger and fear and humiliation and uncertainty. What spreads worse is things like context and statistical nuance. So even accurate data, people who are actually sharing accurate data, becomes distorted because of cherry picking, algorithmic engagement, misleading visuals, or even dramatic framing. And then the brain comes back to the thing that it inevitably concludes. Everybody must be angry and therefore everything is bad. Whereas actually most people, the majority of people, are not even on social media. They're just sitting there making their dinner. So every time you go on social media and you start thinking about, oh my God, the world is awful, everybody is saying the same thing. Actually, they're really not. It's only the people that you are seeing are saying those things. How do you know whether or not most people are actually saying that, or if most people are saying something else? I spoke on a previous podcast about the dangers of echo chambers, so go back and listen to that one if you're interested in that concept a little bit further. But a summary to that bit is that, listen, social media is no good. If you want to find out exactly what's going on in the world, get off Facebook, get off X, because it's the wrong place to go. So anyway, listen, part 8, let's come around to a conclusion. So is everything getting worse? The honest answer. The honest answer is quite simply no. Everything is not getting worse, but as a caveat, everything is not getting better either. There are lots of things that have improved dramatically over the last 10, 20 years. Healthcare outcomes, believe it or not. You're like, Duke, you are lying. Everywhere that I look tells me that the NHS, the National Health Service, is doing awful. But actually, do you know what? The healthcare outcomes that are leading to the struggles that our National Health Service are having are caused by the fact that people are living longer. The cancer is being cured far more rapidly and far more effectively. The diagnosis to diseases and therefore treatment is happening that much more quickly. So our overall healthcare outcomes and our life expectancy has actually gotten a ton better over the last 20, 30 years or so. Even things like safety standards, knowing what a danger is and what is not a risk, what is a risk, what actually will cause you to live a little bit longer. Even safety equipment has gotten just far more effective, all because of data that feeds into it. And most importantly, access to information, that little device you've got in your pocket that a lot of us scroll through to look at memes and cat videos. It actually gives us access to a world of information. And all of those things have got better over the last few years. Some things have got worse, and let me be clear, I'm not going to say that everything is fantastic and you shouldn't listen to what the media is saying. We have to be very, very clear that, as a result of what's going on with the media pressure and how social media goes and how the brain works and how people are rage and engagement baiting our need to feel bad and our need to identify risks, I should probably say. But that means that mental health pressures have actually gotten a lot worse over the last few years. Should be clear that housing affordability has also gone down. I'm not saying otherwise. That houses have become a lot more expensive, and it's just one of those things where your father, your grandfather will turn around and say, "Why don't you own a house yet?" I owned my first house when I was 16, and you're just like, "Yes, Granddad, your first house cost 50p and a pie." It's like mine now costs 10 times my annual salary, and that's if I'm even close. So those things have gotten worse. And one of the things that has definitely gotten worse, and again, I'm not going to sit here and try and take sides. That's not what I'm about. But political polarization has 100% got worse. And this is the big thing that is driving so much at the moment. And the one wish that I actually have for everybody, regardless of which side of which political spectrum you actually sit on, is that you do not make any decisions based on how you feel about what's going on. But if we're to sum it up, though, is that the reason why things feel worse in this country and in the world as a whole is because we see them more and because we're hearing about them constantly and we process them emotionally and not statistically. The problem is not, ladies, gentlemen, and legends, that the data is lying. The problem is we are asking it the wrong questions. So why does this matter? So as I said, this whole thing, the whole shtick, the whole reason that I'm doing this is because I genuinely, here's me telling you, don't react emotionally. But this is based on some fact. And I'm not a psychology expert. I'm not a sociology expert, although I do take an interest in those topics. Okay, so I'm not coming from a place of nowhere, but I'm not an expert. Please, folks, if you've got any contributions to give, stick them in the comments. I would love to hear about them. I would love to read about them. If anybody wants to come on a podcast talking about it, reach out to me. I'll talk to you about it all day. But the whole point here is that I genuinely believe that if people read more into the actual realities of data, understood what the data is, in other words, becoming more literate with data, that the world would be a better place, because poor data literacy leads to things like policy overreactions and moral panics and eventually bad decisions, which eventually leads on to chronic anxiety. When people turn around and say, the data proves that everything is broken, what they usually actually mean is, the data confirms how I really feel. That's not analysis. That is not data analysis. That is what we call emotional confirmation bias, where people have taken some numbers and interpret them in a way that already backs up what they feel. They are reflecting their own emotions into the data they are seeing. That is not true data analysis. So more on that in the future. Have a look over the other stuff on the channel, because that's my goal, folks. I'm putting myself out there and putting my neck on the line. This is what I want for everybody in this world, to look at the actual data, the cold hard numbers, and to interpret them in an unbiased way. Listen, hey folks, it ain't easy. It's not easy. It requires a lot of thought, a lot of skill, a lot of understanding, a lot of education. But we'll get there together, folks. We'll get there together. Some things to be practical with today, though. The things that you could take away from today's show and start thinking about. So it's called the zoom out. It's the zoom out technique. So before reacting to like a statistic or a story or a news item that has numbers in, before reacting to it, ask yourself this. Over what time period is these numbers being presented? And what are they being compared to as a baseline? And what you also should ask yourself, is this a spike or a deep depression, or is it a trend? So what time period are we looking at? What baseline are we comparing it to? And are we seeing a trend here, or is it an actual spike? A single data point that you were looking at, a single number that you're looking at, is quite often emotionally based. It's the trends that we need to look at because they become more informative. Keep that in mind. What time period? What baseline? Is it a spike or a trend? Those are those things. Another thing you can do, apart from the zoom out sort of thing, is you can separate the measurement from the meaning as well, because a lot of people will say that more data is the more data we see that indicates worse outcomes means there must be worse outcomes. And actually, that's not the case. Correlation does not equal causation. Again, I've done a podcast about that. Ask yourself, are we seeing more crime, or are we just seeing more reporting on crime? Are we seeing more bad stuff going on somewhere in the world, or are we just hearing about it more? So separate your measurement from the actual meaning of it as well. Just because we're seeing it more doesn't mean things are getting worse. The third thing is that you need to be wary of certainty. The more confident a headline sounds, and we're talking capital letters, we're talking about words that are being used to sort of highlight that this is certainty that we are being dealt with here. The more confident a headline sounds, the more suspicious you should be. Real data, real analysis, real science usually says, do you know what? It depends. So what does this mean? Actually, it depends. The scientist will never turn around, a true scientist will never turn around and say, we are 100% certain that this is what our numbers are telling us. What they will say is that we believe that if the trend continues, this is what's going to happen next. That is a very, very different thing. So if you have a manager, if you have a guy down the pub, if you have a politician that turns around and says, this is what is going to happen next, they are lying because they do not know. And this is something that should hopefully not be a surprise to you. If anybody says to you, we know what is going to happen next and it is A, B, and C, they are not telling the truth, or they are not telling the whole truth. If your politician says to you, if you vote for that person, this is what is going to happen next, they do not know for certain that that is what's going to happen next. And if they are trying to make out to you that that is definitely going to happen, you should be suspicious about that person. That's my viewpoint. It's a little bit of opinion, but it's actually based on the idea of avoiding bias from data. So be wary of that certainty. If anybody tells you, whether it's a newspaper, a manager, a person you know, somebody, an expert, or even a politician, if they tell you that they know exactly what's going to happen next, they are lying. Go back and look at the person who says, well, we think that what might happen is this if these things from happen, because they know more about the situation than any other person that says this is definitely going to happen. I can promise you that, folks. The next thing to talk about is about diversifying information sources. And again, this is something that I'm sure all of you know. You all know this, but it's just actually not that easy to do. If all of your inputs come from one platform that might actually be one of those outrage-driven platforms I was talking about earlier, then your worldview will skew accordingly. That's not balance for balance's sake. It's statistical sanity. You should actively go through and try and find opposing views to the statistic that has made you feel a particular way. If you've read a headline that says something about a particular viewpoint, something that impacts you or your peers or your family or your country, and it makes you feel a particular way, you should, just for the sake of your own balance and sanity, deliberately go out and try to find an opposing viewpoint. Because, folks, if you cannot find a convincing viewpoint, then that's your decision. That's your decision made. You know how you feel about it. You know what you know where you sit on the side of the fence. That's absolutely fine. But at least you can say, do you know what? I've looked. And I don't mean having a quick little Google search and expect that the first three outcomes are actually going to agree or disagree with you. You need to spend time actually looking at it before you make a little bit of a decision. Do you know, I saw, and I'm bad mouthing social media a little bit and its ills and its risks, but I do use social media quite a lot, quite clearly. And I did come across something on social media earlier where somebody had said that people who say that they have, this is an influencer who was saying that people who say, I don't know enough about the situation to form a valid opinion right now, are a problem. And I was just like, no. I completely disagree with that. I think you should make your decisions, and I do think that you should sit on a particular side of a fence at the viewpoint if it's something that means that much to you. But you are allowed to take the time to actually read into that and research into that and allowed to actually do those things. Don't let anybody force you down off one side of the fence if that's where you sit. And this is really what we're sort of talking about today. Now, I risk that this podcast is becoming more and more political, and that wasn't the intention. But we're living in a rather polarized political world at the moment. Everything in the news that we're seeing is actually going on like that. So the final piece of advice that I'm going to give you before we conclude is that if things are getting too much for you folks, if all you are seeing is bad news, and therefore your brain is convinced that the world is all gone wrong because all you're seeing is bad news, do you know what? You can change your perception. You can physically seek out good news stories. Go and find them, because they will change your perception about the world. They'll make you feel an awful lot better. So as a conclusion, folks, the world isn't ending, regardless of what you might think. The world isn't ending, but it is really noisy at the moment. So everything is not getting worse, but perception and exposure and emotional intensity is becoming more prevalent. We live in the loudest data environment in human history, and our brains haven't evolved to handle it. Our brains still think we're running away from those animals on the savannah. Data can help, but only if we slow down enough to actually read it, understand it, interpret it, form opinions on it. So anyway, folks, that's it. I wanted this to be quite lighthearted, and it ended up actually getting quite serious. So I'm going to end it there. Thanks so much for listening to Data with Duke. Look on the website for the show notes and some links and some information to back up some of the stuff that I'm saying, folks. I don't say anything unless I've got the data to back it up. So please remember, next time somebody says everything's going downhill, you can reply, well, maybe it is, but show me the trend.